Everybody, welcome to our Utah Lake Commission meeting this morning, November 10th, or excuse me, December 10th. Wow, Christmas is in 15 days. We have a pretty quick agenda we could buzz through. Let's postpone reviewing the minutes so we have a few more people that can join. And perhaps, Eric, if it's all right with you, should we go to item 3, and then we'll come back when we have enough voting members to vote on the budgets and the minutes.
That would work great. Let me just click through. That's the right one, yeah. Okay, so let's run through the updates. Walkara Way has seen some progress. We're really excited about this. Not only did it get a bump in funding, but we just started on the pilot area fence install. So this is the one that goes along a portion of the Sleepy Ridge Golf Course with the 8-foot fence. That's what we'll see along the east side of this entire project. And then we are also going to have the majority of it along the shorter fences that go out towards the lake and along the lake shore. Those will be installed this fall as well. At least the portion that the budget will allow us to push ahead. But it was exciting to see the progress on that. We also were able to head down there and bring our new Utah County Commissioner-elect, Tom Sakiewicz, to see the project, tour around it, talk a little bit about the lake. And we were excited to hear that numerous times he mentioned that Utah Lake was a top priority for him. And so we're excited to have somebody that's excited about the lake come into county government. Combined with those that we have there, I think we'll be able to continue making some really cool investments in the lake.
Awesome.
I wanted to bring up that the Utah Office of Outdoor Recreation, they held their kind of kickoff meeting yesterday. There's a couple important dates there for you. I'll send out this presentation so that you have the links as well. But they have 3 different grants this year. They've got a mini grant for $500 to $10,000. They have an outdoor classroom grant that's also kind of in that range. They have the infrastructure restoration grant, which is $5,000 to $150,000, and then they have their regional asset grant, which can be up to $500,000 on projects that are larger than $2 million projects. We have at least a couple projects that could probably fit within that, and they say that if you bundle it with the kind of a larger project that's taking place, you stack the odds in your favor of getting that grant awarded. And so we would love to work with any of our cities that are considering those and kind of help move that forward. The deadlines are shown there. January 20th is when they open the application, but they do have lots of documentation on their website that could get you started, and you could have your application ready to go the day that they open that if you had your folks on it right away. Then they have a staff review, and that's a suggested deadline, meaning if you can get your application in before March 1st, they'll have staff review it and give you feedback and help kind of massage it so that it best fits their criteria. But the actual application deadline isn't until March 19th. So again, I'll have that information on the slide deck that we send out to the governing board after the meeting.
That's all. I know cities. Yeah, aren't there some cities that could take advantage of that have projects going right now? Aren't there?
Absolutely. It just really needs to be a project that hasn't already been money hasn't been spent yet. So you have to spend the match dollars for these projects within the contract period. So that's the only thing. And most of them that we have around the lake anyway are kind of fit that description. Their funding is coming up here soon, and we could either time it for this year or time it for next year when the dollars are actually spent.
All right, sorry, go to shoreline.
Okay, so our shoreline restoration work, we're just starting the planning of that. In fact, this afternoon I have a meeting with the county, and we're going to go through the story map I would pull it up, but it's not working well on Zoom. So again, you'll have this link. We're building the link right now. It's a live link. There's a username and password. Both are commission, just with a capital C at the front. But it has all 150 points around the lake that were tested for soil attributes. And we'll be using that to kind of guide where we want to do some restoration and where we'll do the most, just get rid of the invasives. But here shortly, the folks that built or did the study for us and built the link for us are going to add the option to add notes to each of those points, so that as you go through that as a municipality or as a planner of any type, you can add notes and say, hey, this is going to be a future drain, or this is going to be we're planning to do some development here, and that can be picked up as we go through in our planning process for shoreline work. Also, just of note, the Lake Restoration Solutions are planning to assist with the restoration work on the lake, and at this point they're planning to purchase an additional marsh master and kick in some funding for the grant funded employees that work for the county to be able to complete work annually around the entire lake. Right now we're getting close, especially close on the chemical treatment portion, but we haven't quite gotten to a year where we can have the entire shoreline rolled out or smashed with the marsh master. So that should wrap that up so that we're able to do the whole lake every year, which really will make a difference on the effectiveness of those treatments, so that we don't have a seed bank, on the portion of the lake where we aren't working that year, contributing to the regrowth elsewhere. So we're excited about that. Utah County Tourism Improvement Grants. We talked about these earlier in the year when the Tourism Board recommended or approved for recommendation these 3 projects. At the time, this was our first application, so we were kind of learning, and all of these, once they go through that Tourism Tax Advisory Board, the subsequent step is going through Utah County Commission. And so over the last 8 or 9 months, we've been working with the County Commission to iron out the final details, and the last 2 projects were voted to contract just here in the last few weeks. And so all 3 of these projects are good to move ahead. Huge investment in the lake. This is the $5.4 million is the county appropriation or county grant portion. And then each of them are matched with an equal or greater amount. So this will be fun to see some substantial projects come in on the lake. It looks like Vineyard will likely be the first project to get under construction. The next will be Saratoga Springs. It'll take them half a year or longer to get their permits in place, and then they'll move ahead. And then American Fork will be the 3rd project to be completed. And so we'll kind of see a rollout over the next few years, which will be fun to kind of see that progress down there. Okay, how are we looking on, that's the end of the director's update. Are we good on quorum?
How are we looking, Sam? Unmute, Sam.
Hey, sorry about that. We're at 10, but there's a couple names I wanted to check. I've got Brian Cottom's name showing up, but then I have a second Brian, just a first name.
Brian from Payson.
Ah, perfect. Okay, that makes us at 11. And then there was a phone number that just joined, 801-319-4999. Is that with somebody's name, or is that an individual?
That's Mayor Kafusi.
Oh, perfect. Mayor, thanks for joining us. I'll note you down.
Yeah, happy to be here.
And then there was a Jeff as well, or Jeff's iPhone.
That's Jeff Lamson from Orem City Council.
Perfect. Okay, that's what I need to confirm. So we have more than enough for a quorum.
All right, if that's true, let's bounce up to the action items and look at the governing minutes from the last couple of months.
Okay,
I'd consider a motion to approve the minutes from September 17th, 2020.
Denise Anderson, I'll make a motion to approve the minutes from September 17th, 2020.
Terry Malkovich, I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Those in favor?
Aye.
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 All righty. I didn't ask for discussion, but I think we're good then. Let's move to the monthly budget reports. I think, Eric, are you going to help us out with those, the September to November?
yeah. So I'll just bring up, these are the reports that we posted and sent out to the group. Nothing of note. We're sticking within our budget well. You'll note at the end that we've added from previous years, we didn't really report much on our capital projects, but those have been included on this report so that you are aware of where dollars are going from that capital projects fund. We've wrapped up, according to the documents, we have one more month left, but we've wrapped up our soils assessment and then our 2 algae treatments. We're either complete with those, or I think our second algae group is just waiting to get in their final report, and then that'll wrap up that account as well. Otherwise, we have a couple unspent portions, but those usually go, the equipment portion will go into next summer when we make the determination with the county on what equipment is needed to keep our efforts moving ahead on shoreline restoration work. So I'll click through that one. Our October, similar situation. Just kind of, we're not all that exciting when it comes to budget stuff. We just do what we've budgeted out each year and stay within budget. So
For the two-man show that you guys are, I think you do a great job. Do we have any questions as it pertains to the budget reports? We need to motion and approve those, Sam or Eric?
yes.
All right. If I could have a motion to approve the budget reports from September to November of 2020.
Lon Lot, I'll make a motion that we approve the budget report, November 2020.
Chris Karn, second.
Thanks, Lon and Chris. We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Those in favor?
Aye.
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 We'll do an any opposed just in case, because it sounds like everybody's in favor. All righty, there you go, Sam. Let's do the 2021 meeting schedule. Or hang on, what's this ULWQS management goals? Do you want to work on that, Eric?
Oh yeah. Well, we're going to hold that and talk about that when Erica and Scott present on point number 5.
Okay, that's what I assumed. All right, let's just
That's
look
just
at
one more action item that I wanted to mention at the beginning of the agenda, but once we've worked through it, then we'll ask for a motion on that one.
All right, let's look at these meeting dates. If that works. Are these mostly Thursday mornings?
Those should all be Thursdays. Sam, did we have any special? Looks like we're.
The one special consideration is we always move December's meeting up to avoid any conflict with holiday plans for people.
But still a Thursday, right?
Yeah.
All right, if there's no discussion, I'd entertain a motion to approve those dates.
This is
Chris Gobe, Spanish Fork, motion to move or to approve.
Chris Condi from Lehigh. I'll make a second.
All right, thanks to the two Chris's. Those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. All right. How about, is Mike here, or are we going to go right to Erica?
Mike is here.
Let's have Mike give us a little presentation then.
Still on mute though.
Is he coming, or say again?
Oh, there we go.
There we go. All right, let me share my screen. I just have a couple of slides to kind of move through. Let me know if you have any problems hearing me or seeing the slides that I'm displaying. Eric asked me to just come and give a quick update on some of our plans as a June sucker recovery program moving into 2021. So I'm here to do that and go ahead and get started. I just have a couple of background slides before we kind of launch into the main presentation, just so everyone's on the same page and understands the purposes and why the June sucker recovery program exists. So this is our endangered fish found only in Utah Lake. It's named after its spawning run. I think everyone's aware, while the adults primarily live in Utah Lake, they migrate up the tributaries, primarily the Provo River and Hobble Creek, to spawn during the month of June. Listed as endangered back in 1986, and these fish actually grow to be fairly large. We've seen individuals up around 26 inches in length, and they actually live for quite a long time. Some of the oldest individuals that we've encountered out there have topped out at 40 years. So they're a long-lived fish and really adapted to life in Utah Lake. With the species being listed as endangered in 1986, we faced some issues as we moved into the 1990s, and as our water resource agencies looked to complete the Central Utah project, we ran into some environmental compliance concerns when it came to the Endangered Species Act, specifically involving the June sucker. So in 2002, we formed what's called the June Sucker Recovery Implementation Program. And this basically is set up so that we can comply with the Endangered Species Act. And as long as we make significant progress, or sufficient progress, towards recovery of the June sucker, we can be allowed to continue to develop our water resources and continue to use water resources in the Utah Lake drainage basin without having to be worried about the Endangered Species Act coming in and kind of dictating what happens with our water. We do a huge variety of projects. Some obviously are more well-known than others and generate more publicity, but we try to take an ecosystem approach to recovery, meaning we're doing everything from stocking June sucker raised in captivity back into Utah Lake, to providing in-stream flow water, to outreach, habitat restoration, and then quite a bit of research that takes place out on Utah Lake. As we move into 2021, one of the projects that really generates probably the most interest out of everything we do is the Utah Lake carp removal. And this is a project that the Utah Lake Commission has been a partner with us from the beginning. We feel like we share a lot of the same goals and purposes behind the carp removal project. And this project has been very successful. When we started this back in 2010, it was after about 6 years of research and pilot projects. And there were definitely people who thought we were crazy to embark on this challenge. But basically, our research showed that if we could reduce the carp biomass in Utah Lake, we could see a return of aquatic vegetation and see some changes in the ecosystem out there. But it meant removing just huge quantities of fish from Utah Lake. And so we've contracted with commercial fishing operations since that time, removed over 30 million pounds of carp. When we started out, our goals were actually 5 million pounds a year, but we were never actually able to meet that high of a target, but have been able to accomplish our goals in reducing the carp biomass. And we've seen changes in response to those changes in the fish community. As we move into 2021, we plan to continue to remove adult carp. We've suppressed the population quite a bit, but still need to continue to remove adults in order to hold the population in check and to keep it from rebounding. As we've researched this smaller population out there, we've seen an increase in the number of small carp, young carp, that really are good at avoiding some of the gear types that we utilize. And so in 2021, we were planning to increase removal of those younger fish and really eliminate that size class that would threaten to really respond and move up and take the place of the fish that we've already removed over the last decade. And then we're always mindful of different control techniques. There's always new ideas out there in the realm of invasive fish control. And so we try to stay engaged with that. Some of these are pretty crazy ideas, ranging from introducing a virus to Utah Lake that would target carp, to genetically modified organisms. We don't have any plans to implement any of these yet, but we want to stay involved in the research in case there is something that holds promise and wouldn't have collateral damage to the remainder of the ecosystem out there. It's definitely an area that's interesting, but one where we feel like we need to proceed with caution before we do anything in this realm. Another project that is really taken off this year and does generate a fair amount of interest is this Provo River Delta Restoration Project. And this is also a project that's been in the works for a very long time. Our first public meeting about this project was back in 2010. So again, a decade ago, and this is a project that's designed to restore the connection of the Provo River and Utah Lake. It really is based in June sucker recovery and providing the habitat conditions necessary to allow all the millions of larval June sucker that are produced in the Provo River each year to have the habitat conditions they need in order to survive and become adults. Those habitat conditions are really missing in the current alignment of the Provo River, and this project would divert part of the Provo River to the north of its current location. This is Utah Lake State Park here, and so we're talking about about 300 acres located to the north of that location where this delta is being created. In addition to the habitat improvements, we have a number of recreational amenities that would be added. There will be just over 1.25 miles of new trail included in the project, creating a loop down at the bottom of the Provo River. We have a number of trailheads, fishing piers, non-motorized boating access improvements that we think will really change the landscape of the lower Provo River and make it appealing, even more appealing than it is. It's already quite popular. Make it more appealing to the users down in that area. It is a long-term project. We started in March, and our hope is to have it wrapped up by 2024. If you're looking for more information, we do have a project website, provo-river-delta.us, that contains updates on construction progress and other information about the project. I mentioned we started this back in March, and we've been able to make really good progress, primarily because things have been relatively dry, and it's allowed us to move much quicker than we anticipated. So all of the gray areas are the planned channels and ponds that would be dug as part of this project. And then the areas that have been filled in with light blue are the areas that have been completed. The brown areas are some riparian mounds that were planned as part of the project. And then the kind of yellowish tan are future riparian mounds that haven't been built yet. But this project, this has all been accomplished since March. It's, like I mentioned, it's more than we had anticipated, but we're pretty happy with the progress that's been made and are excited to continue this into 2021. We were able to hold a tour for the governing board earlier this year, and our hope would be able to have another site visit to invite anybody who was interested in coming down and touring the site later in 2021. We have to work out the details, but our hope would be maybe sometime in April or May to have the governing board come down and visit the site again. Here is an aerial photo taken about 3 weeks ago. of the site. You can see all the channels that have been dug, and then we've been laying out what we call swamp mats. They're basically sets of railroad ties that are bolted together that allow us to go out and access this otherwise really wet area, and you put heavy equipment on them to be able to dig out these channels. A lot of this water is really groundwater. This area is very wet, and most of you are probably aware that under prior ownership, the landowners would actually pump water to try to keep the lake out of here. There is Skipper Bay Dike that runs along this side in order to make it dry enough for their use. And we have continued to pump to allow access and make construction a little bit easier. But a lot of the water that's in the picture is just from groundwater filling in these ponds and channels that we have dug. Where you see the kind of gray, this is where we've laid out those swamp mats. And as we move into 2021, we'll be going out and digging the remainder of these channels. Our anticipation is, with as quickly as things went in 2020, we hope to maybe be able to wrap up the excavation of the delta itself by the end of 2022. That said, everything could change based on weather and all the progress that we've made. We could be slowed down quite a bit, but so far things have gone really well. And then another thing that we're really excited about is this downlisting rule. And I've been talking about this for over a year now, but it's a very significant accomplishment. I don't think it's possible to overemphasize the significance of this. The Fish and Wildlife Service is close to issuing a final rule that would downlist the June sucker, meaning that the status would be upgraded from endangered to threatened. And this, you really don't hear about fish moving towards recovery. In the history of the Endangered Species Act, there's only been 4 species of fish that have made this jump, this improvement from endangered to threatened. And so June sucker would be the 5th, and we think that it's really impressive. All of our partners have worked so hard over the last almost 20 years to take a species that was on the brink of extinction and bring it to where the Fish and Wildlife Service is agreeing that we've made progress and improved the status of this species. In terms of what this will mean going forward, it is really just a sign of all the work and accomplishments that we've made. We don't plan to stop any of our projects. You'll probably remember back to our slide about our goals. Our goal is really to work until the species is fully recovered. And so it's going to be full steam ahead, but kind of an opportunity for us to pause and look back at all the work that has been done. We are hoping to publicize this quite a bit and really tout the accomplishments of all of our partners in getting to this point. And then we'll continue to move forward on all the fronts that we've been working on in order to maintain our compliance with the federal law and also continue to recover the species. I'll go ahead and stop there. If there's any questions, I would be happy to answer them. And then one thing I do need to add, I've accepted a position with the Utah Reclamation, Mitigation, and Conservation Commission. And so Russ Franklin will be taking over my work here as the coordinator for the June Sucker Recovery Program. And so he'll probably become a more familiar face to all of you as you guys move forward in your roles. So thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Are there any questions? This is Craig, although I do see that Mayor Frost has joined. So after this, I'm going to push it over to Mayor if you want it, Mayor.
I would ask one quick question to Mike. Maybe you could explain what it would take. You know, more than anything, I'm hoping that you describe what the Provo River Delta project does to the likelihood or hope that the fish could become downlisted entirely.
So the Provo River Delta project is really the key that we feel towards full recovery for complete delisting of the species. Right now, the big hangup that the Fish and Wildlife Service has is even though we've increased the adult population, and you can go down to the Provo River in May or June and see hundreds of June sucker, and you're down there looking at them and you think, how is the species endangered? And it's really because the species doesn't recruit on its own or naturally. It's really reliant on our stocking program in order to keep the population growing. And so by creating the delta, we will provide the habitat that those young naturally produced fish need in order to survive and become adults on their own. And it's really that linchpin, that missing link to allow that recovery to take place. Do we know for sure if it was going to work? I guess we don't, but we've done quite a bit of research. We built a smaller version on Hobble Creek that has worked. And so we really feel like this project is going to be that one missing link to allow natural recruitment of the June sucker and move us towards a discussion in which we can see the June sucker completely delisted. So it's one of the reasons we're so excited about this project and so excited to see the progress that's been made on the Delta so far.
All right. Thank you. Thanks, Craig. Sorry, I had a really important test to take and it just came back negative. So I felt good about it. Let's move on to item number 5, Erica. And it looks like Scott, is Scott on with us as well?
Yes, I'm here. Thanks.
Okay, great. We'll turn some time over to you.
Great. Well, thanks, everybody. Let me make sure this is working. Is that slideshow working okay? Great.
Yes.
Great to be with you all this morning. And thanks for giving us a chunk of time on your agenda. I know you're all very busy. I'll try and work through this quickly. What I'm presenting today is a summary of a document that you should have received last week, going over really the management goals that the water quality study has developed for your consideration. This is an effort that we've been working on since the spring, over the last, all over summer and fall, and I can't really emphasize enough how much effort has gone in from our science panel and steering committee and staff to prepare this. So hope you've had a chance to look at it. I know it's a monster document, and I'll try and summarize it here, and then be happy to take any of your questions. Big picture, what we're looking for is setting the direction of this water quality study. There's been, frankly, a little bit of chicken and egg between our steering committee and science panel with respect to the steering committee asking the science panel, well, what could Utah Lake be? And the science panel asking back, well, what do you want it to look like? And so this is our attempt to try and answer both of those questions so that we make sure that as the study progresses, we're coming back with answers and scenarios and potential future states that are of interest and, you know, aligned with the goals of the commission and of Utah County residents. So these are basically statements about the desired water quality condition for societal, economic, and ecological values of concern regarding recreation, aquatic life, and agricultural uses of Utah Lake. Those are the 3 primary uses that we protect Utah Lake for from a water quality under the Clean Water Act. Just to sort of outline how we got here again, you know, this really started after we were reviewing the Utah Lake Water Quality Standard Framework, which is the document that outlines kind of all of the studies and how those studies will come together ultimately to make a recommendation for water quality. And it was in that review and discussion with the steering committee that we realized we really needed to spend more time coming to an agreement on what the purpose of the study is, what the goals of future Utah Lake might be. So we engaged in one-on-one interviews with all of our steering committee members in May and developed a draft to share with them. They reviewed that and sent it over to the science panel because we want to make sure that whatever we're asking for is actually something that the science panel can analyze, review, and output back to us in the form of future scenarios. So the science panel's worked hard over the last couple of months to evaluate that, give some feedback to the steering committee, And last week, the steering committee voted 14, we have 16 members, 14 agreed to move this forward to you for consideration. The other 2 were non-votes. I will say of the 14, 3 or 4 of those votes were, we called it can live with. So we had 10 people that fully supported and 4 that still had some questions, but felt it was ready enough to move forward for your consideration. So I'm not going to go through that monster table. I think that's probably too much for this meeting. I'm happy to bring it up if you have any questions, but I'm just going to roll through kind of the high level goals that were set. On the recreation front, we set goals to basically have Utah Lake support a robust recreational industry and increased recreational opportunities and experiences for the community. Those included some sub-goals, if you will, with respect to reducing algae and cyanobacteria blooms, AKA harmful algal blooms, some goals related to toxins not threatening public health, and to improve the public perception of Utah Lake water. So some of the, a goal is really aspirational. What we ultimately need are measures that will be used to assess against these goals. And there are a number of measures in the table related to harmful algal blooms, the magnitude of the blooms, the frequency of those blooms, the spatial extent of the blooms in a future condition. Obviously, there's measures for toxins. There are water quality standards related to recreation. And then there's assessment measures for public perception. On the aquatic life front, our primary goal is that Utah Lake water quality supports a robust and healthy fishery, as well as waterfowl and shorebird communities. This includes the water quality supporting reproductive populations of June sucker as one element of the project that you just heard about, the program that Mike Mills oversees. And Mike does serve on our science panel, and I hope he's able to continue in that role in his new position. We've also got some goals related to ensuring there's water quality that supports sufficient habitat for the fish in Utah Lake. Of course, we can't use water quality as the only way to restore habitat. You just heard a great presentation on all of the various elements that go into habitat restoration. But we want to ensure that water quality doesn't undermine or interfere with those efforts. We've got goals related to toxins not threatening fish, waterfowl, and shorebirds. We don't have any evidence that that's happening today in Utah Lake, but it is something that we want to ensure we're clear we don't want to see happen in the future. And then finally, we do have a number of water quality standards for aquatic life related to dissolved oxygen and ammonia, pH. So we want to ensure that those are attained or continue to be attained in many parts of the lake. They already are. And then finally, on the agricultural front, we kept it simple. Really just want to see that the toxins in Utah Lake do not harm livestock or crops. For the most part, we think that the targets that have been established for recreational uses will also be supportive of agricultural uses, but that's something that we will make sure to confirm through this study. Finally, the Clean Water Act requires that any standards that we set for a water body like Utah Lake is protective of downstream waters. So we'll make sure that the Utah Lake water quality is protective of uses in the Jordan River, and that includes the recreational uses, the aquatic life, the fishery use in the Jordan River, and the agricultural uses, especially in the southern part of Salt Lake County from the Jordan River. You can see on the left here a picture of Utah Lake during the bloom in 2016, that heading down the Jordan River. So we know these waters are connected, and we need to make sure that we're thinking about downstream as well. So again, this is just, again, an example from the table that you received last week. We've got various management goals that are specific to various uses, whether they're fish, recreation, and some of those, and then we have measures that will be used to assess each of those goals. And in some cases, we have more than one measure that might be used to assess a goal. And in some cases, we have a numeric target. For example, dissolved oxygen, the standards for that are already set in rule. 5 milligrams per liter for the warm water fishery in Utah Lake. Others, the toxin concentrations are not in rule, but there is EPA guidance for appropriate targets for microcystin, for example, one of the algal toxins that we do see in Utah Lake. And then we'll have others, for example, the magnitude, extent, and frequency of cyanobacteria or harmful algal blooms. You'll see the target there is not numeric, it says to be determined. And so rather than predetermine what we want that to be, our intention is that we will come back to you with a number of future scenarios for consideration, and we will look at the relative difference of those scenarios. And in combination with review of costs, we'll make a decision, a policy decision about, you know, how far we want to go with respect to harmful algal bloom reduction.
Can I ask a question, Erica? When you say costs, are you thinking of costs to continue the study, continue the costs associated with the results of the study?
The latter. So the costs associated with implementing the study. Okay. So that would be, and I'll get to this in a little bit, but costs, for example, to wastewater treatment plants, costs to stormwater systems, costs to implement agricultural improvements. Some of those are regulated sources and some are not. I'll get to that in a little bit here. One thing I do want to emphasize here is that the measures that we're looking at are really about whole lake health and should be distinguished from, you know, a particular site or a particular event that we might still see in a marina, for example, or a beach. So we'll look at kind of overall lake health is really the goal here for this study. Just a reminder, I know you all have heard me talk in the past about algal blooms, but there's really 3 contributing factors. Just to remind everyone why we're focused on nutrient reduction. These are nutrient criteria, so nitrogen and phosphorus. We know we're seeing an increase in harmful algal blooms across the state, across the country, and honestly across the world. And, you know, the combination of factors that are driving those increases are increasing nutrient loads from a number of different sources, increasing temperature, and the water clarity and levels in water management can also affect harmful algal blooms. Of these, the one that we have the most control over at the local level is the nutrient loading into the lake. So I want to just explain, just to be really clear, what we intend to bring back to you. This is meant to look like a cartoon because it is a cartoon because we haven't finished our study. But the idea here, once we identify these goals and measures, we will ask the science panel to run a number of different future scenarios so that we can bring this information back to you for consideration. So here I've got a water quality measure on the y-axis. Let's call it algal toxins, just for the sake of conversation, and then time on the x-axis. And we've got the current Utah Lake state there in the middle. We know that with no nutrient controls, nutrient concentrations will continue to go up, and that's because of the projected growth in Utah County, one of the fastest growing areas of the state and the country. There's another scenario where we implement our current regulation, the 2015 phosphorus rule, that became implementable this year in 2020. Even so, with the growth that we're seeing in Utah Lake, we will eventually overcome the improvements that are achieved through the phosphorus rule. The question is, how long will that take? And then there are several, potential nutrient reduction scenarios that may or may not actually achieve our goals. And you'll see that these projected outcomes have not just one point or one line, but they are bands because we will have uncertainty associated with the outputs from the science panel. And we want to be really honest and transparent about that. For more costs, we can reduce the uncertainty, perhaps, but that's a policy decision that we want to make at the end of the study with you, rather than making it now. So this is just a hypothetical, water quality measures typically we want them to go down. We want lower concentrations of toxins, lower concentrations of pollutants. So that's why the diagram's framed that way. We will have multiple measures, right? So we're going to have maybe toxins. Maybe the second one is some measure of harmful algal bloom, magnitude or extent or frequency. And again, we run the same scenarios so that you'll be able to see, in this case, perhaps both the nutrient reduction scenarios achieve the goal. And then we have to decide if it's worth spending extra money to get all of the measures there. That'll be a policy decision that we will not make in a vacuum, that we intend to make with you. We really feel strongly that the commission is best placed to consider both the costs and the benefits associated with Utah Lake water quality. You represent, many of you represent ratepayers in Utah County, and you also represent the primary users of Utah Lake. So as we look at what it will cost and what the benefits might be, we think that you are the best placed body to really help us wrestle with that policy decision in the future. So again, we will evaluate trade-offs. I've mostly spoken this morning about the management goals as they relate to the benefit side. So again, those goals are specific to public health and aquatic life, recreation, but there will be an analysis of costs as well. And we will be looking at costs to all of these sources of nutrients into Utah Lake. Wastewater infrastructure is the one that I think gets the most attention, and it's probably because it's the one that we regulate directly in terms of numeric effluent limits and can really drive potential upgrades to wastewater treatment plants across the county. So it's understandable that that's been a lot of the focus. There are potential improvements to be made on the stormwater side. We've recently passed new requirements in our MS4 permits that will help with new development, reduce the nutrient loading into Utah Lake. Those are being implemented across the state already. But we could need more, and there might be a cost associated with that. And we want to be really honest about those costs when we come back to you at the end. And then non-point source reduction. These are our unregulated sources of pollution, such as agricultural runoff. We have incentive programs that can be used to try and target that. We've already redirected a position from Southern Utah to Utah County to help get started on those non-point source reductions, to bring people into those incentive-based programs. So we are looking at all of these. And then habitat restoration, of course, it has a cost, and water quality is just one piece of that. And Eric and Mike are better positioned to speak to the ultimate cost of those. Because there's been so much attention on wastewater, publicly owned treatment works, I did want to just emphasize that the division, although we are the regulator of wastewater in the state, and there's always that tension between regulator and regulated entities, we really consider the publicly owned treatment works, they are public entities, we consider them partners. And I think that's, and our goals are largely the same. If you look at the mission statements on the walls of many of these facilities, they are to protect public health and protect the environment and clean water. So we see our mission as aligned with these. Obviously, there's tension when there's a lot of dollars involved. This table just goes through, and it's kind of ordered based on the largest facilities in the county or that come into Utah Lake. But you can see that many of these are quite old facilities, built before the 1980s. Many of them even before the Clean Water Act was implemented. They've undergone some level of upgrades over the years. And then I wanted to just emphasize as well 2 ways in which the division can really support wastewater treatment plants as we move forward with implementation. One is in the form of regulatory relief. I mentioned earlier that our 2015 phosphorus rule was required to be implemented by 2020 across all mechanical treatment plants in the state. We received variance requests from looks like 6 of the facilities in Utah County, and we granted variances to all of those based on the timeframes that they requested. So some of those facilities, Provo and Timpanogos, were granted an additional 5 years. Pace an additional 4, Orem an additional 3, and Spanish Fork and Springville an additional year, although I know Springville has requested some more time, and we're looking at that and will likely grant that as well. In addition, our Water Quality Board provides financing for these projects. We try not to just throw this all on the ratepayers. You can see over the years, the amount of financing we've provided to these facilities totals about $170 million. And I want to also emphasize that, really the upgrades of these facilities are partly driven perhaps by nutrient reduction needs and will be, but they're also driven by the growth that's happening in the county, and they're also driven by the fact that we do have aging infrastructure across the county. These are meant to be plants with a 40-year lifespan, so to speak, and in some cases we're pushing 60, 70 years of these treatment plants. So Mayor Kaufusi can probably speak best to the pain it takes to really move a project forward like this. Provo City is moving forward with a large, complete upgrade of their treatment plant. We've helped with that financing, and our board just approved on last week the Spanish Fork City project as well. That will be a total upgrade. So anyway, I just wanted to provide that context. I know that there's a lot of discussion about potential costs, and I just want to be clear that the division's here to support the POTWs. Also wanted to just flag for you, I know that you're being not bombarded, but perhaps receiving a lot of information from a lot of places about particular aspects of the study. Everything from, a particular source is not calculated correctly, or, I've heard things about this is how long it's going to take for the lake to recover, or these are the treatments that are most appropriate long-term for the lake. And I guess my plea is let's let this scientific process play out. It takes time. Science is about finding, the best supporting evidence for hypotheses. We're not going to get an absolute answer. We're going to get back, like I showed you on that graphic, the directional nature and the most likely outcomes for particular scenarios, but there will be measurable uncertainty along with that, and that uncertainty has to play in to our eventual policy decisions. Good science takes time. It's open to change. It's looking at new evidence. It has to go through independent peer review. It has to have verifiable and repeatable results in the data analysis. And it has to be done accurately, not with back of the envelope calculations. So I just wanted to remind everyone of that. And it is complicated. I showed you the simple graphic earlier. I don't expect you to look at this whole diagram, but really this is the diagram the science panel is using to connect the dots between up here, our sources of nutrients, and down here are our management goals. And there's a whole lot of stuff that goes on in the lake in the meantime with respect to nutrient cycling and the ecology. And they are really looking at every single one of these boxes and every single one of these arrows to identify where we need to do additional study to reduce the level of uncertainty that will eventually be delivered back to the steering committee and to the commission. As an example, we're spending $100,000 just looking at this particular relationship between dissolved nutrients and algae in the lake. We're spending $200,000 on studies to evaluate sediment. We've heard a lot about the amount of phosphorus that's in the sediment. For 150 years, we've been discharging nutrients into the lake, and a lot of it is sitting in the bottom of Utah Lake. Well, what does that mean in terms of the potential for the lake to recover if we were to reduce the loading in the future? So those are just two examples. By the time we're done with this, the state will have invested $3 million in this study, looking at each of these individual linkages and then pulling it all back together so that we can give you back the best answers possible. So let's not short circuit that. Let's not undermine that process, I guess, is my plea. Another just reminder, the science panel are people. Here they are. We have brought together some of the best experts in the country to work on this. We have 6 excellent scientists from Utah State, BYU. We have Dr. Theron Miller representing the POTWs, Mike Mills from June Sucker. And then we have a number of experts from around the country. Dr. James Martin developed the models that we're using here and that are kind of the high level models that EPA recommends. Ryan King, an aquatic ecologist from Baylor University in Texas. Dr. Mike Brett, University of Washington, done a lot of work on these issues in other lakes, and engineer. And Dr. Hans Perl, who's one of the world experts in harmful algal blooms. So I just wanted to emphasize, I know there's been some discussion. I've heard rumors that, you know, our entire science panel is from out of state. 4 of the 6 are from out of state, and we call them our independent members, along with Dr. Mitch Hogsett from Forest Green, because we need to have independent members for procurement purposes. So the only difference between the independent and the not independent members of the science panel is those that are not independent either have a conflict with somebody on the steering committee or are interested in bidding on the studies themselves, and so therefore can't be part of evaluating the proposals. That's really the difference. Just a reminder for those maybe that are new to the commission, the study process that we've outlined here is quite robust. We're working with a steering committee, 16 members that represent a variety of different stakeholder and lake interests. They sat a science panel, and then the science panel oversees the study contractors. All of the recommendations, such as this management goal table, come back to the commission for consideration before they go through the division to the Water Quality Board, and then eventually to EPA for approval. There's a new step now that the Utah legislature will get involved if the costs of implementing this study exceed certain thresholds. So I just want to emphasize that this was negotiated. I think we went through 10 different versions back in 2017. We met with many council people, mayors, the commission approved it. And if there are concerns about the way that this process is working, I think this is a good time to try and fix that. But what I don't want to see is that we start undermining the process and going around this very intentional and deliberate process. We think that this process will give us the best available science from our nationally renowned scientists, an evaluation of feasibility. It'll ensure that the study is in alignment with the goals of the community. It will provide certainty to the regulated entities and incorporates projected growth. So again, my plea is let's allow this science to play out. And if you hear things about a particular element of the study, let's discuss it. But what I don't want to get into is kind of the combat science, you know, about a particular finding. This is why we've brought such a broad group of scientists together to consider such a complicated topic. And what's at stake really is the future of Utah Lake. I love to quote Representative Brady Brammer, who the first time I met him said, let's turn Utah Lake into a community amenity rather than have it be a liability. And with the growth projected in Utah County, I think there's an incredible opportunity to make this one of the state's premier natural assets. I think it already is. We don't want to see further degradation, but we want your we want to make sure that the policies we come up with are the correct balance of costs and benefits. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions. We have prepared a possible motion that you might consider for approving or recommending the document that you saw. But there may be lots of questions. I'd be happy to take those, and I can open up the big document if you want to get into the details. Thanks for your time.
I have a couple of questions, and I'll go first if there's others. But so Erica, could you just tell me where you think? I saw the chart, the last chart. So as far as this body is concerned, the commission itself. So if we get this, everything plays out. How long do you think this is going to take to get the actual science back and in a form that we can say, okay, this is what it is. This is what it is not. Is there a timetable that you feel like you have as a goal? Yeah, we're targeting 2023, so 3 more years. I know it's exhausting. It feels exhausting to us as well. We've been at this for 2.5 years now. But some of the studies that we're doing require
that we look at the lake across all 4 seasons. So we're commissioning 2 new studies this month. So those won't be completed till the end of next year. The modeling's getting going, but the model has to wait for some of these data. So we're doing as much as we can to accelerate that without circumventing really important steps in the process. So 3 more years is our best estimate.
Okay. And when that data is complete and we can look at that as this commission, is this commission going to be in a position to say, we'll accept that data and the costs associated with it, or we have reason to pause based upon even the costs? We're talking, it could be millions, or it could be, affecting our communities. And that is a factor in all this, I think, that when you talk.
It absolutely is.
And it could be the hundreds of millions to our residents.
Right. So I'll do you one better, Mayor. Rather than just bring you back one answer and a potential cost, we're going to bring you options. So those options will be in the form of various potential future scenarios, and you'll have the opportunity to consider those options, the costs associated with them, the potential benefits associated with each, the uncertainty associated with each one. And then once we select which scenario we want to adopt, then we can talk about, compliance and time and costs and financing and how to get there. But we won't bring you just one option.
Okay. This one thing I find with I'll just say the legislature, is that they do not like unfunded mandates from the federal government. Yet, as great as they are, and I hope there's no legislate, maybe there are, I don't know if Brady's on here. This could feel much the same way. Maybe it's not driven by a governing body like the legislature, but if it is implemented, I think funding options would be very appropriate. And I know that would have to go through the legislature because it could have a direct effect on sewer rates. We know that, and other things. And so I'm supportive, but I do feel like if this has a massive price tag and it will affect every resident of American Fork or whatever city that we represent, I think that's going to weigh in the balance of a decision based upon what we know, what this panel knows. I'm trying to keep a very open mind to the things on the periphery from other scientists that have, credibility and claims to have a lot of knowledge of the lake as well. But I'll keep an open mind, and I'm going to try to be, very partial. But I do have a concern when this comes down that weighing in the balance will be the costs associated with this and how it'll affect the average, ratepayer citizen in American Fork. A fee is much like a tax. It is just something that's extracted from our residents. But I believe in this. I really do. I think it's very important that we go through this and we figure out some answers. It will likely try to be debunked by other people. But I think if as long as we know that the Lake Commission has some authority to just say, okay, there's the factors of science, there's the factors of the costs associated with it, and then we can say, I'm sure in the end you'll say that by doing so, we'll notice, and we believe, I guess, the science will say that it will have a dramatic effect on the algal blooms, or maybe it will take 10 years. I don't know what that timetable is because of the sediment and the nutrients in the sediment. But I believe in science, but I do have to weigh in the balance of how it'll affect the average person to restore it to where it is.
Mayor, this is Carrie Malkovich. I have a similar concern with regards to funding. Erica always goes to the legislature for all sorts of funding for the lake, and sometimes we get it and sometimes we don't, and we have to readjust. But this is something that can't just stop in the middle of it. And so, Erica, maybe this, is there ability for us to have federal funding for part of it and then state funding? And is it something that we have to then be begging for every year, or is there the possibility for a long-term appropriation from either federal or state for an ongoing program for restoration?
Great questions. And let me see if I can address them. To be clear, this is required under the Clean Water Act. We have an impaired water, as the implementer of the Federal Clean Water Act in Utah, we are on the hook, so to speak, to figure out how to fix this. The typical way, the way that EPA likes to see these things done is that we do the science, we identify the standard, we don't look at costs, and then we later try and figure out how to make it work. We're not doing that here, and frankly, I'm taking a little bit of a risk in taking on the study in this way. But I think it's the right way. I think it's right for you as the policymakers, those that represent both the interests of the lake and the interests of your ratepayers, to be the body to help us wrestle with that balance of costs and benefits. So to answer that, this will absolutely be part of the decision, and you will be part of the decision. I am under no illusion that we are going to be successful with the legislature or even the Water Quality Board if this commission is not supportive of whatever recommendation comes out. You are the elected officials in Utah County representing those that will be most impacted both positively and potentially negatively with respect to costs. With respect to financing, I showed that table of the financing that we have offered in the past. These are largely both federal and state funds that we offer. Some are grants, some are loans. For example, the Provo City deal, I think, was $75 million in loans at 0.5% interest rate and a $2 million grant. Spanish Fork City just recently passed $5 million, $4.5 million in loan, $500,000 in grant at a 1.1% interest rate, I think. So there are ways that the state can help. We do get a capitalization grant every year from the federal government to invest in wastewater and stormwater infrastructure in the state. And that's where these dollars come from. So that's going to be the primary mechanism that we will have to help you. The other is obviously granting more time to do these upgrades if they're needed. The other thing, though, that I'll say is I'm not sure that it's going to be that expensive. We'll see what the options are, but we've already have Provo City upgrading to a treatment plant that will be able to accommodate really any new regulation related to nutrients. Spanish Fork City doing the same. And those are being driven partly by nutrients, but frankly, partly by growth and partly by the fact that those are very old treatment plants that need to be retired. So, by the time all of these upgrades are going, we will see what additional work is needed. But frankly, there's been a lot of investment already in the last 10 years here in Utah County, and I'm hopeful that any new regulation will not be too onerous, but we'll have to see. What's hard is this 3 more years, who's going to be on the commission? There's elections between now and then. Who are the right legislators to be kept in the loop? One of the challenges we've had through this is keeping you all informed and keeping all the right people informed of our progress without an answer yet. So, here I am again presenting with no answers and asking you to be patient for the science to play out. And that's hard.
So when you say science, Erica, they analyze what they can see and touch and measure. Do you think that the final report will be, if we do this, the lake, the algal blooms will decrease or by a certain amount of time? Are they going to give what they think is an end result based upon timelines and everything?
Exactly. And that's why right now what I want to make sure we're clear on up front is that we tell them, the scientists, how we want that information back. We want it back in the form of these measures, because these are the measures we think are relevant to the goals that we've set for the lake, so that we can compare potential future states of the lake. We can compare those future scenarios. Our next exercise, once we get through this management goals and agreeing on what the measures will be to actually identify some of these scenarios. So I've put 4 hypothetical scenarios up here, but the next task is for the steering committee to come up with, you know, what kinds of scenarios we want the scientists to run. They will be looking at observational data, so everything that's already collected that's in the lake, they're collecting other data. They're doing some experimental work. So that bioassay study I talked about is where we actually use small versions of the lake and add and subtract nutrients to see the impact on algae. And then all of that will be wrapped into computer models that are needed, because you can't really test the future other than through a model. So if you want to test these future scenarios, you take all of the best data and information and linkages and put it into a model so that you can model the future. And then you can model all kinds of potential future options. That's the intent.
Great. All right. Thank you, Erica. Any additional questions?
Mayor, I have a question on these tests and things that are going on over the next 3 years. Is the steering committee been involved in determining which types of testing and such is going on? Is that how that works, Erica?
Yes, the steering committee has been very involved in, again, these are kind of, I think what you're referring to are what we would call the measures. You know, how is it that we're going to measure change? So, you know, identifying what things to test, yes, is something that the steering committee has been involved in. Honestly, we're collecting a lot of data, and, you know, maybe more than we need. And in many ways, it's about how you summarize that. So if you have data from once a month at 10 sites in the lake, do you average all that together? Do you show that as individual? You know, do you show the maximum? Are we interested more in, you know, the worst case or the average situation? There's 100 different ways to summarize that data. And that is what we're trying to get at with some of these measures, so that we can compare the current data, the current state of the lake, to these potential future scenarios.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that does. It's just that as we move forward with this, and you made a very good point about people changing on the commission here, good data will be important for good decisions in the future. And I think it's important that all of that data that's collected be appropriate data, meaning things that we're able to make decisions based on a broad scale of data.
Couldn't agree more.
All right, thank you. Any other questions? All right. Sam, do you want to throw that motion back up on the screen? Or is that you, Erica, that has that motion?
I've got it here.
Okay. There's no questions. I would entertain a motion.
This is Craig Jensen. I'll make that motion to recommend the use of the document Utah Lake Management Goals, Assessment, Endpoints, Measures, and Targets to provide clear direction on the Utah Lake Quality Study to ensure scientific outputs are meaningful for future policy decisions.
Okay.
Carrie Malkovich, I'll second.
Okay, I have a motion by Craig Jensen, a second by Carrie Malkovich. Any discussion on the motion?
My only question here, there's nothing in this motion that ties us to a future decision, is there?
No.
This ties you to how you will be presented with information for a future decision, if you will. This ties you to the measures that will be presented back for future scenarios.
All right, thank you.
All right. A motion and a second, and I'll call for a vote. All in favor say aye.
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 Okay. Is there any opposed? Okay, it's a unanimous decision. Thank you, Erica, appreciate it.
Thank you very much, everyone. Appreciate your time.
Okay, we'll now move on to SePro. Item number 6 on the agenda. I saw him on here. Maybe you could, Ryan, there you are. Ryan, we'll turn some time over to you.
All right. Give me a second here. All right, thank you everyone for your time today. I'm Ryan Van Gotham, a water quality technical specialist with Utrafix, a division of SePro. And with me today is Scott Schuler, and I'll let him introduce himself.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm the national manager for our water quality division at SePro, and look forward to the time we have here today.
All right, we're here to kind of report some of the results and findings from our demonstration this summer on mitigating harmful cyanobacteria on Utah Lake. So what's at stake here? You know, as we're talking about moving towards with the restoration of the lake, what we're looking at is what can we do in the short term to really improve the lake in reference to these blooms, as the consequence of not doing anything in that meantime is pretty high with the cyanobacteria and toxins that are going to be persistent in the environment. So we put together our final report on the demonstration project Eric has that can be made available. We're going to cover what we did, what we learned, and then also some possible paths forward from here. So for the mitigation project, we had 2 mitigation sites. We worked in Utah Lake State Park, which is about 48 acres, and Lincoln Beach Marina, which is just under 3.5 acres. And these are very small areas on the lake. And so with that in mind, you know, water exchange via currents and winds was expected to impact our demonstrations, but we were still able to get some really good results here. We applied 3 different technologies that we tested in mitigation. SeClear is an algicide and water quality enhancer. PAC-27 is a peroxide-based algicide, and Phoslock is a phosphorus binding technology. And so from June through the first week of September, we did treatments in Lincoln Beach Marina, and then August through September, we worked in Utah Lake State Park. For the results of the mitigation focusing on cyanobacteria and algae, we were able to successfully control the cyanobacteria with every application that we applied. With using SeClear, we had greater than 95% initial control on multiple treatments, with an 80% average initial control. And PAC-27, the peroxide-based algicide, we had a 93.5% initial control. So dropping, you know, that down from pre-treatment conditions. But the longevity of those initial reductions was variable. The best reductions we had held for 7 to 16 days at our sites. The best longevity of conditions, so how the site looked, was 2 weeks and greater. But one key thing is, you know, these reductions we did, we were able to prevent scum formation quite a bit in these sites. And when we were able to use these treatments in combination, so every 2 or every 3 weeks, multiple treatments provided control long-term in these sites, especially Utah Lake State Park. In the bigger areas, you know, looking at the results of the state park versus the marina, the bigger area, we had better results. And we expect that to be even better at a larger scale on Utah Lake. So at Lincoln Beach Marina, we did multiple treatments. We did have the opportunity to do some when it was very bad, when there's a large Aphanizomenon bloom on the lake on the first week of August. And as you can see in the photo on the left, it was quite thick. So here's a Photoshop before the treatment inside the marina. There's not as thick as outside, but very green. And we could see the Aphanizomenon. 1 day after treatment, you can see the change in the water color and clarity. And by 2 days after, we were able to drop those out and improve the water clarity by about 6 inches. So here's an example of the treatments we did at Utah Lake State Park with a timeline. So this was the first treatment. Before treatment, we had cyanobacteria and some algae, but dropped those out. And for the initial control of cyanobacteria, we had greater than 95% control for a week out, and then it worked its way towards pre-treatment conditions towards that 2-week time point. And that's when we triggered our next application and kept reducing the cyanobacteria. And we were able to kind of put this together and reference it to what was happening outside the marina. So on this graph here, we have chlorophyll on the y-axis, and that's a kind of a proxy for the cyanobacteria and algae abundance. And on the x-axis, we have the time of dates. So we did 3 applications in Utah Lake State Park from August to September. And the green line shows the chlorophyll levels that were outside of the state park, about a mile offshore of there, and also captured some blooms on cyan. Whereas we were able to keep the chlorophyll much lower inside the state park with our treatments and keep those reductions down, prevented any scums from forming during this time period, and the cyanobacteria levels low. So how our treatments impacted water quality? There was little change to standard water parameters like the pH, the alkalinity, and the hardness. The nutrients and dissolved oxygen, which are important, were variable due to these just being small sites impacted by some water exchange and biological activity. So we weren't able to pull too many trends out of that. With utilizing C-Clear, the total phosphorus reductions that we were expecting to see were not clear in the data, probably due to some of this water exchange that occurs and change in turbidities. But we did see improved water clarity on almost all these treatments that we did. And there was a bump in the free reactive phosphorus, so that dissolved state about 4 days after on some of these applications. Phoslock, which is a phosphorus binding technology, we reduced phosphorus up to 54% when we used it in Lincoln Beach Marina, with no impact to the other standard parameters. And PAC-27, this is the peroxide-based algicide. There's no impact to standard parameters, and we paired it with Phoslock to prevent that phosphorus release from occurring. So with utilizing C-Clear, that is a copper-based algicide, we had to meet copper compliance, and in that we did. So on the graph on the left, we have dissolved copper. The threshold we had to meet was about 29 micrograms per liter 4 days out. And each of those data points show one of our samples 4 days out, and those were all well below that 29 micrograms per liter. So we can safely use copper in these waters and hit those thresholds. In the graph on the right, we did some longitudinal samples of copper throughout time with more details, looking at the hours after application. And you can see these data points start around 400 micrograms per liter and quickly drop towards that threshold by 36 hours after application. So this is a very a short exposure of copper in Utah Lake. So what we learned and demonstrated that we can effectively reduce cyanobacteria in Utah Lake based on the species, the water chemistries we have out here in the site conditions. The longevity is variable, but will be better at a larger scale. So we're looking at 3 weeks plus on if we were to do some large scale applications. And these treatments will have a negligible risk to human health and the environment. And as we're aware why we're doing this, the Utah Lake water quality is nutrients and other factors are important. Phosphorus is one of those nutrients, and it is a limited nutrient across the country for growth. And just to put that in perspective for everyone, 1 pound of phosphorus can support 500 pounds of algae growth with all other conditions allowing it to. And so it's a pretty important nutrient to be thinking about. And that's one of the things that we're really looking at is the phosphorus problem with Utah Lake. with the nutrient reduction goals are already set in place, reducing some of that elevated loading into the lake. Also, some of the science has shown that there's extremely high levels of phosphorus in the sediments. And what some of those studies have kind of shown is there's some uniqueness to this of how it's bound in the sediment to iron, and there is a potential for release there. And there's some high pore water phosphorus. So in the available dissolved state, that is high and is substantial, and we need to consider it. And they are looking at that. And some of the mechanisms that phosphorus can come out of the sediments is sediment resuspension by carp and wind action. There can be passive diffusion, and cyanobacteria can mobilize. If there's a high pool there, they can mobilize some of that dissolved phosphorus. But the current study they got going on will get at some of these answers of how important that is. So a path forward here, we present some options here to help accelerate some of the HAB mitigation and restoration efforts for you guys to consider. And I'll turn this over to Scott to discuss those.
Thanks, Ryan. So, I mean, the simple conclusion is that from a short-term perspective, algicides are a viable solution to help manage HABs on Utah Lake. And, the pilot study we did this year showed that we could be effective and that we could meet the numeric copper criteria with copper-based products, or as we demonstrated with PAC 27, a peroxide-based product, we could be effective with a non-copper product as well. So it is a viable solution. I think the scale at which that might be implemented, or the duration that management like that might continue would be something, obviously for many of you on this meeting to consider as you consider paths forward for the management of Utah Lake. And then, phosphorus is a significant component of the future management of Utah Lake. It's going to require a variety of we believe it's going to require a variety of areas in which management occurs, including the watershed, the wastewater treatment upgrades, which Erica spent a little bit of time talking about. And then we believe that given the extremely high level of phosphorus that is loosely bound in the sediment of Utah Lake, that's also going to be an area that would require future management for a realistic restoration of Utah Lake. Next slide. So to kind of put that into perspective, there are a variety of ways that harmful algal bloom management could occur with algicides on the lake. Large scale management is going to have the largest and longest lasting impact. So this would be individual treatments of 30 to 50% of the lake. And, based on past experience on large scale algicide treatments, it would be variable. This is a highly complex scenario, but, at least 3 weeks of control would be expected. It could be 3 months. Based on, again, experience, we would expect that large scale management would be needed 3 to 5 times a year, given the conditions that we've seen and experienced at Utah Lake and the history of blooms on that lake. So depending on the scale of that and the frequency, you're likely looking at somewhere around $1 to $3 million per year to mitigate harmful algal blooms across the entire lake utilizing algicides. There are other scenarios where sections of the lake could be managed, or high use public areas. And those could be done, on a frequent basis every 1 to 2 weeks, obviously for a much lower cost than large scale management across the lake. But the benefits of those treatments won't last as long, primarily due to water exchange with the main lake. And but they could help provide some mitigation for recreational use and public health concerns in high use areas. Next slide. Phoslock was used in our demonstration project, and although we only treated a small 3.5 acre marina, we did see it reduce in-water phosphorus levels 54%. Again, using it at that very small scale, and actually a relatively low dose of Phoslock given the site conditions. So it is a viable tool to incorporate into a algae management program as a way to mitigate phosphorus within those areas that we treat, especially if we do small scale management. And it could also be a tool for larger scale management to mitigate release of phosphorus from the sediments. And that Randall paper from 2019 actually mentioned this technology as a potential viable tool for Utah Lake. And there are a few reasons why Phoslock's has a very good fit for Utah Lake. Utah Lake, as you all know, is shallow. It has a lot of wind and therefore has a lot of sediment disturbance. And Phoslock is a technology that works much better in those conditions than any other phosphorus mitigation tool out there. And then, it is lanthanum is the active ingredient, if you will, in a bentonite clay matrix. And there are also a number of publications about how that bentonite clay matrix, even at a low level, can help stabilize sediments and further reduce the release of phosphorus. So from a technological standpoint, Phoslock has a very good potential fit as a future management tool in Utah Lake. Next slide. So, to further assess that, would be, one concept we have is, the best way to analyze that would be in situ in the lake to do some demonstration projects, if you will, call it 50-acre areas, maybe a Provo Bay and or a 50-acre area, or, Utah Lake State Park. Those would be good test sites. And you could apply Phoslock to these sites and do a lot of in-lake measurements to see the binding within the sediment of the lake, as well as impacts that it might have for release. So we can do some of that in the lab, and actually BYU is working on some of that. Our lab is also going to be working on that based on some sediment samples that were collected, I believe, in October or early November from the lake. So we are looking at that from a laboratory perspective, but to get the real answers to guide future management, you really need to do some in situ demonstration testing. So that's something that I think should be considered. Our goal, ultimately in support of the Utah Lake Commission and others charged with managing the lake, is to help you meet your goals. I think many of the concepts on here actually are within the document that was reviewed earlier in the meeting. We have, a team of scientists and a series of technologies that can help short-term and long-term, and we're here to assist with your guidance. And we'd like, if you have any questions, please let Brian or I know.
Still on mute, Mayor.
Mayor, you're on mute.
I should know better. When you talk long-term, do you think that this is something that the science panel will be considering, Erica, or is it just cost prohibitive in regards to, what a treatment as opposed to just maybe shoring up the phosphorus levels coming in?
So I think that the results from the science panel will inform this approach, specifically, looking at the sediment chemistry and understanding how something like Phoslock might help. Probably we would consider a scenario where we, perhaps, I'm just hypothetical, right? we do a scenario where we say it's going to take X amount of years to achieve our goals. If we just look at loading reductions from the watershed, we could accelerate the time frame of seeing those improvements, perhaps by applying something like phosphate. We could run that as a separate scenario for consideration. There'd be a cost associated with that, but the benefit would be, perhaps a faster recovery. I think that's how the science panel will engage in this. I don't think we'll be recommending specific treatments, but this is where the next step in our project is to figure out what kinds of scenarios we want to ask the science panel to look at. And if the commission's supportive, I'd be happy to include a version of at least the phosphate piece. The treatments themselves, the copper-based treatments, I think, that literature is pretty well established. I mean, you apply algicides and you kill algae, that works. It's a matter of cost, and we have some questions about long-term use of something like copper in a lake with an endangered fish. But, I think those can be addressed.
Great.
So I think through the scenario process is my short answer. Yeah.
Right. Any other questions? Eric, do we have it in our budget to kind of continue this treatment into the next year?
We don't currently, but depending on what the legislature says, we know that they kind of move some dollars over to Forestry, Fire, and State Lands to do continued research and or treatments. And so we'll be working with Forestry, Fire, and State Lands to determine how to best use those dollars.
Great. I'll just go on record saying I'll offer up the American Fork Boat Harbor. It just seems to be where it's the closest spot to the news media from Salt Lake, and they usually set up camp and just, there's something about AFO Harbor, but I know it's because they don't want to go the extra 20 minutes. So anyway, all right. Any other questions for Ryan and his team? Okay, thank you very much. That was a good presentation. All right, we'll move on to item number 7. And Sam, we'll have you give us a staff report.
Okay. Let me just pull that up. Can everybody see that presentation okay?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So just wanted to update the board on a few things, some that we brought up at our June meeting, and a couple other updates we've been working on. First and foremost is the life jacket drive. As we brought up, or sorry, not June, our September meeting. The commission has partnered with the families of the 2 young girls who unfortunately died on the lake earlier this year in an effort to implement a life jacket loaner program at one or more access points at the lake. And so after Labor Day, the commission ran a life jacket donation drive, and we feel it was quite successful. 190 used life jackets were donated. Just about $1,700 were donated online through that option. It received 11 mentions in the news media, and then over 20,000 people were reached on social media. And you'll notice on the right side there, we have a little more information about how that broke down across the social media channels, and also in the traditional media. A lot of that was online articles that were out there, but there were also some TV interviews and a radio interview that occurred as well. So we saw some great success with that. Eric and I met with individuals from each of those families yesterday on Zoom and just discussed moving things forward. We're working on some drafts of the operating procedures for how the program will function and be maintained, as well as agreements with the various marinas and other access points in order to get stations constructed there and operating there. So over the next several months, we'll be working with them as well as several partners like the Division of State Parks and others in order to pull this all together and get this implemented. So we look forward to keeping you in the loop on that. We're not going to our next slide here. Ooh.
Hit the arrows at the bottom of the screen rather than there. Yeah.
Yep, that might work better. Okay, the next one was just, these are some of our, or these are the winning 6 photos from the photo contest this year. And we also had Instagram, but as you all will likely remember, each year at the end of the contest, we do put out to the governing board that as a tool in our community outreach that the commission will print one canvas for each of you at your request. So we will send you the online form. Normally we're in person, we just have you write it down and we're good to go, but we'll send the online form to you today. If you can just select one of those photos that you would like to have on display at your organization's public offices, we appreciate that effort in helping to improve public perceptions and help people see when they visit your offices just how awesome the lake is. Speaking of community outreach, we've been working on some website improvements on UtahLakeCommission.org. Some of that's just been simplifications. We did want to make sure we highlighted that we're in the process with a developer of implementing a more or less live. It's provisional, just like Central Utah Water, but that column on the right of the slide you see there is how it displays on Central Utah Water's website. And so we wanted to say thank you to specifically Mike Mills, who helped connect us with the right people, but to Central Utah Water for sharing that data in a manner that we can also implement that on our site, so that when people come to visit our site, we'll have a page that has what the current water levels are, weather forecast, and other helpful information to help them be safe and also have a good time at the lake. We also wanted to make sure we thanked Linda Marina with the partnership we have with them, getting another live camera feed up at their marina. So now there is one at the state park and at Linda Marina. And we are in the process of, we're waiting to hear back on a grant in order to implement a much more in-depth and more far-reaching to multiple access points, a camera system to help that as well. And the last thank you was to Mountain Land Association of Governments. Most of you will have seen this map before of the trail plan to go around all the way around Utah Lake. We worked with MAG recently to get all of the access points, which was requested, I believe, by it was either a technical committee or governing board. Someone requested that we do that. And so they helped us make that a reality to get that up on the trail plan, so that when anybody looks, one of the layers that they can turn on is the access points and see how that plays into the trails and hopefully help them enjoy their experience down at the lake. Last two things we wanted to report on. One, we're just wrapped up yesterday our most recent team of BYU interns that we work with for their on-campus internship program. And they help pull together a lot of helpful information that we'll be reviewing. They helped us conduct a survey online about what kinds of events residents around the area would be interested in. We did designate those by city. So if any of your particular cities are interested in that, we would love to work with those who have marinas or shoreline, or even some of the cities that are further away, based off of what's your residents said, what kind of classes they'd be interested in, or tournaments they'd be interested in, or events they'd be interested in down at the lake. Those interns also did an analysis of the marinas as venues and made recommendations that we can share with those marinas as to what kind of events would go well there. They also analyzed what they determined to be the top 13 lakes across the U.S. for visitation and events that are going on. And they did this to try and compare, not just events in general people are interested in, but what's going well at lakes, whether it's festivals or tournaments or classes, and what types of activities are popular. And the next team that we work with, we're hoping to get one starting in January. We haven't heard yet. We were a little late in submitting. So we don't know if we'll get a team in January. If not, we would continue the analysis in the fall with their team of interns again to continue to refine that down and make good recommendations as we move forward. Last but not least, we wanted to highlight the Adopt a Shoreline program. This was implemented back about 4 or 5 years ago. And it was an effort to have all 27 public access points adopted by individuals or groups in order to do several cleanups each year and help keep the shoreline clean of garbage. And that was a result of a survey that was done by the commission, I think in 2013, where garbage at the lake was one primary concern from residents who responded. And so this program was implemented. So as of June of this year, we were at 26 out of 27 access points adopted. Since then, I just checked this earlier this week, we added additional areas because it had become so popular. So now not only are the access points adoptable, but also there are sections of trail that can be adopted. And there are a couple city parks like the new Sunset Beach Park in Vineyard or Shoreline Park in Saratoga that are also close, even if they're not, more or less an official access point. So total areas that could be adopted is now 45, so almost double the amount that we've had before. And we've increased the individuals and groups who have adopted all the way up to 41. So a lot of great success this year. A big part of that in the last couple of years is due to this program being approved for dedicated hunter hours. So we're really appreciative of DWR working with us on that and getting that approved. So that's been great. We also in June implemented a reporting program with the Adopt a Shoreline volunteers. So they actually fill out a form every time they go out and they report on how many people went, which access points they visited, if there's any large items that they're concerned about, or if there was vandalism or something, they also report it through there. There have been a total in the last 6 months, a total of 72 cleanups performed. We estimated about 282 hours of service. And based off of kind of the industry standard for the value on that for an hour of service, it's totaling just over $7,600 in value that these volunteers are providing. So we are greatly appreciative of their efforts, and we enjoy working with them in their community effort to try and help take care of the lake so that people have a good experience when they get down there for their first time. So that is the information that I have. Was there any questions on anything that I covered on our community outreach and communications?
Sam, this is Jeff Lamson from Orem. Just a quick question. So if people want to adopt a section, do we just reach out to you? How's the best way to make that happen?
It's a great question. Thank you for asking, Jeff. They definitely could reach out to me. If they visit UtahLakeCommission.org, we have an Adopt a Shoreline page on it that has a map showing which areas need to be adopted versus already been adopted. It has the actual Adopt a Shoreline Agreement PDF that they sign is available on there, as well as some frequently asked questions. And then there's a form where they can actually click on the button that says, I want to adopt an access point, and they fill out the form and submit it, and our staff receives it and can then start that conversation with them.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Anything else? Okay.
Thank you very much, Sam. All right, we'll move on to item number 8. If you notice in your packet, we have 4 meetings scheduled for the year 2021. It sounds really good, 2021. So March 18th, June 17th, which will be a budget hearing, September 16th, and then December 9th. So,
Mary, I sent you a quick chat. Did you spot that?
You know what? Let me go. Sorry. Can you want to just talk about that, Eric?
Yeah, so just wanted to let everyone know and plea for support legislatively. We're making a request this year. Last year, we made a legislative request for the Walkara Way project for the trail funding and kind of the infrastructure fencing and so forth. At the end of the day, that was retracted due to COVID redistribution of funds. In the meantime, we were able to get funding through MAG for $4 million of the project, and to complete the entire trail section through Walkara Way, we're making a $4.4 million request, and Representative Brady Brammer is our sponsor on that. And so any and all support that we can get to complete that project. It's beautiful. Today at 3:30, if anyone wants to take a tour, their meeting, we'll send a social media post out. It's just an invitation to the public to go see that project and get out in the wetlands. If you'd like to see it and haven't had a chance, that'd be a good opportunity, or we could arrange for a private tour if you'd like as well.
I know that in our city, we will meet with our legislators prior to the session, and I will absolutely bring this up. And then we actually have a lobbyist that's kind of has our eyes on the legislature, and I'm going to put this on his radar as well. So
awesome. Thank you.
If any of you could do the same, that would be great.
I already met with mine and did the same.
Great. Okay.
Thanks, Gary.
You know, I feel like too that one of the real proponents of Walkara Way has been Commissioner Ivy, and we're going to lose Commissioner Ivy. And so we need to find a strong advocate at the county level to help us through this with this as well.
For sure.
All right, item number 9, general comments from the public. Is there anybody from the public that would like to make a comment?
Mayor, this is Soren Simonson. I'm
Eric's counterpart with the Jordan River Commission, and I try and participate in your meetings as often as I can. We're kind of joined at the hip, if you will, the Jordan River and Utah Lake. Eric Ellis, from your executive director, serves on our governing body as well, and we really appreciate his contributions in many ways. I just want to say how fascinating it is to see the work that's going on around water quality, because what happens at the lake, as you saw in some of the material that was presented by Director Gaddis, really does affect the Jordan River as well, and all of the communities downstream. The lake's the largest tributary to the Jordan River, and our recreation assets are connected as well. So I just want to express so much appreciation to the work of this board and the great work you're doing around water quality improvements and recreation expansion as our trail systems are beginning to interconnect, as our water recreation opportunities. Saratoga Springs is working on some boater access points that will make paddling and kayaking between Utah Lake and the Jordan River much easier for people that want to experience both recreation opportunities. So just an expression of thankfulness for the work that you do, and recognition of how important it is, not just for all of the communities in Utah County, but for all of the communities that are connected downriver along Jordan River as well. Thank you for your service, and Happy New Year to you all. We hope 2021 is a better one than 2020 was.
Thank you. Any others that would, public or even board members that would want to bring up a general comment? Okay. I would just leave it at that. We would expect March 18th, and we'll leave it up to what the economy is and where COVID is at the time, whether we're going to be virtual or meeting in, who knows, something might change and we can actually see each other's faces. So with that said, we'll adjourn the meeting. Do I have a motion to adjourn? I have a motion to adjourn. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second to adjourn. All in favor, say aye.
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 All right.
Aye.
All right. Any opposed? Hopefully not. All right. Merry Christmas and have a great year.
You too.